Hello and welcome to the final part in the Harry Mason scale videos. If you've seen the previous videos, then welcome back. If not, then you should probably watch the others first, as they all tie into this video in some way or another. This is all of the things that I don't have a specific section for in the reviews, but believe have a relevance in one way or another to the other elements. How you control a game and interact with your on-screen character is something that you only really notice when it's bad. Most of the time it's unremarkable, but often it has a massive impact on how you perceive threats and deal with situations. The tank controls in the original Resident Evil trilogy are usually just considered a product of their time, but I've always thought it was a very deliberate design choice that greatly impacted how the game dealt with atmosphere and scares. As a player, you're very limited in your ability to flee from a situation, and whilst this is less of a problem the more familiar you are with the controls, it can be frightening and overwhelming to find that you can't seem to get away from numerous zombies fast enough. The remake allows for two-dimensional controls, allowing you to move your character in the direction you move the stick in, rather than rotating them in the chosen direction and moving forwards or backwards. And it makes it very easy to walk around zombies and greatly reduces the struggle of getting away. The problem with tank controls is that it'll also annoy a lot of players who will rightfully see it as a limiting factor, because that's what it is. There aren't many developers who are going to be interested in including a feature that's a benefit to the horror but a detriment to the accessibility to some players, plus it comes across as antiquated. Everyone has a right to enjoy games, and the more people that can, the better, but limited controls can make a huge impact on the flow of combat, and that can determine a lot in terms of the horror element. When it comes to combat, there's really either feeling powerful or feeling weak. I found Dead Space was very empowering, and the more I upgraded the weapons, the more death and pain I was able to deal out, which despite the environment and how many enemies I was accosted by, never became much of a problem. They drive home the point to cut off the limbs, and that's the fastest way to kill something. Shoot the legs and then put it out of its misery while it's on the floor. The over-the-shoulder perspective and fluid controls made shooting the right parts of the necromorphs pretty easy, and you can even slow down time and stall them by throwing things at them to make the shots easier. But there's always a bit of dissonance when it comes to making out your protagonist to be diminutive in the face of a giant threat, but also have them wipe out every enemy in every level over and over, like your pest control rather than fighting for your life. Rule of Rose's combat is designed to be poor, but it often comes at the cost of the experience. Whilst it's thematically correct for a teenage girl to struggle with combat, the way Rule of Rose handles it is often so poor that it breaks the immersion. A one-on-one fight with a severely hampered boss character with an inferior weapon to me went so badly that it felt like I was fighting the game's combat systems rather than the enemy. The fear drains away quite rapidly when limited controls are making something frustrating rather than challenging. Darkwood's combat is designed to be clunky, but the more you get used to it, the more one-on-one fights you stand a chance of winning. You're only meant to be able to defend yourself, but in tight areas or up against multiple enemies, your chances drop significantly. You have to charge up each hit and then unleash it whilst in range of your target. It's timing and precision, which is the same for the guns in the game. It's difficult, and it feels like your fault when something goes wrong as opposed to the game just not functioning properly. The clunky controls stop you from being too powerful without making you feel totally helpless. For all of the reviews that I do, I always choose medium difficulty for a baseline experience, as difficulty can really impact the amount of stress you receive from a game, especially in the horror genre. I find that generally the easier the game is, the less chance of getting scared or stressed by anything that's happening, because either the stakes are relatively low or some element of the game is too easy to worry about failing. Games that are either too hard or too punishing can feel unrewarding or frustrating, and as I've said before, dying too much can really numb the player to the consequences of dying and drain the fear of death from an experience. Death cycles are, in my opinion, one of the quickest ways for players to either give up on the game or stop being affected by the horror elements. If you keep dying a lot, then the fear of failing is less of a problem because you've been through it so many times that seeing the death animation just won't bother you anymore. When I first started playing Alien Isolation, I never found it very frightening, but I found it frustrating instead. I wasn't very patient and died a lot to the alien, but replaying it last year I found the game much more frightening because the amount of time I'd spent dodging the alien and successfully successfully hiding from it made me feel like I was tempting fate over and over again, and eventually my luck would run out, which made it all the more frightening and disappointing when I did eventually die. Save points can make a big difference in terms of the perceived game difficulty. Fixed save points have always made the concept of making a mistake daunting, and having to replay a section of a game puts a lot of pressure on the player to get things right. Dying in Alien Isolation or Resident Evil can send the player back a long way depending on the last time that they saved. Quick saving in Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl is something most players will tell you is required to get through the game with how difficult some of the combat can be, and unfortunately timed shotgun blast or stray bullet to the head can down your player instantly. But in the face of how frantic and frightening the combat is, it doesn't change a lot even having something as powerful as quick save. It's stressful without anything to lose, but without it the stress would be insane and would almost certainly be frustrating instead of frightening. Quick saving in Fear changes the game radically. The game isn't as hard as Stalker with its bullet time and more forgiving combat, and adding quick saving to the mix makes most encounters just trial and error, removing the punishment of death from the gunplay. Darkwood again has roguelike elements, and whilst the combat can be difficult, it's easier to find yourself on the receiving end of several things at once, like running away from savages and accidentally walking into a bear trap, getting stuck and dying. The game takes away some of your precious equipment when you die, some of which may have taken hours to gather, and forces you to go back to where you died to reclaim it, with the caveat being that you may have to go back into enemy territory with less gear to find missing things, which causes a lot of stress. If you die again, you lose more things and it starts to become hopeless, but if you leave it, you may never reclaim those items, forcing a player into a very difficult situation. The game saves automatically after specific events, and this again puts pressure on the player since you can't undo your mistakes by reloading an old save. Once it happens, you've got to fix it or live with what you did. The permanence can make death seem incredibly foreboding. Ultimately though, there's no way to make difficulty the same for everyone. Every player has different amount of experience with games and everyone is different. Difficulty is always going to either attract people to it or push people away from it, and I'm only commenting on how this can affect the horror elements of games. I enjoy replaying horror games, and many of my favourites I've played several times, and whilst I still really enjoy them, I find that fear is greatly decreased with each playthrough. The problem horror games face the most, especially more linear stories, is just that most of them are only really good once. You can argue that a lot of games are like this, but because of their intent, horror games' effectiveness dwindles rapidly the more it's replayed. Whilst in most games you'll know the plot twists and where to find things the second time around, horror games are trying to frighten you, and the more you know when they're going to try what, the less frightened you'll be. The most unfortunate example is Layers of Fear, because it's a specific sequence of events that doesn't change, and whilst there are a lot of them, the twists and turns in the house's layout aren't going to shock the player if they've already seen them. Scripted events tend to fall apart the second time around, since it's very easy to remember when stuff happened. In Amnesia: The Dark Descent, the first time you open this door in storage, you won't know there's a grunt waiting to attack you in there, but the second time you just won't open the door. The sad thing is that the most memorable moments are going to be the ones ruined the most the second time around. Games with a more organic approach to scares tend to have more replayability. Again, Stalker's combat can happen literally anywhere, and it can be frightening when it's just suddenly thrust upon you. Fatal Frame's ghosts mostly appear in the same place, but if you wander for too long they can randomly attack you. Keeping things fresh is really the key to replayability. In terms of scripted events, the element of surprise is something that you can't really emulate multiple times. The only game that I can think of that uses so many scripted events in a single area that you're still seeing new ones many playthroughs later is Amnesia Rebirth. The fort area has multiple sound effects that play to give you the feeling that you're not alone, many things getting knocked over behind you, things passing by doorways, and there are just so many of them that it's disconcerting no matter how many times you go to the section, on top of its really intense atmosphere. Games like Until Dawn, choose your own adventure games, and things with multiple endings will always have the advantage when it comes to replayability for the simple curiosity to see the extra endings or other content, but even so, they're still rarely frightening the second or third time around. There's a lot of things I don't address in reviews because either they're irrelevant to the horror content or they just aren't important. I rarely mention graphics because it often falls to the sidelines compared to design. A game can be astoundingly realistic but have poor art design. The way things are meant to look often shines through limited graphics, which is why sometimes poor graphics is the art choice. Look at Bloodwash or Paratopic. They're meant to be limited because it either leads more to the imagination or it's just an aesthetic choice that comes across as creepy. Pixel art horror games are here to stay, and I'm always finding games that deliberately lower the resolution on my computer because they've decided low res is creepier. A game's age matters even less for the same reason. Games like Sanitarium are actively creepier now than they were then because they're dated, and Silent Hill continues to age like fine wine with each passing year, making the presentation of the game more and more alien and disturbing than what AAA studios are bringing out. Game type is the only thing that I bring up at the start of every review because it's important for the player to know what kind of game it is, point and click, first person shooter. It doesn't always affect the horror content, once again, with some point and click games being far more disturbing than first person games. All of what I'm getting here is that it doesn't really matter.
Is this a dream? It's gotta be. Not even a kid could believe in this. When am I going to wake up?
This for now is the end of the series. I don't have anything more to say on these, but I don't mind discussing stuff in the comments when I can. Horror games have always been an interest of mine ever since I first played the demo of Amnesia: The Dark Descent back in 2010. I'd never been scared by a video game before, and it was so unusual that even though I didn't have much money at the time, I paid for it there and then. After beating it, I was straight on Google finding other games by the same company and then going out of my way to find the best horror games ever, playing the classics and trying new things. As I've gotten older, I've become more cynical and patterns form with games copying other games and formulas repeat a lot. But there's still a lot of interesting things, both new and old, that keep on making their way into my to-do pile. Darkwood, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, Overblood, and Unforgiving and Northern Hymn are all games that I've played this year that I'll be looking at this Halloween, and I hope as time goes by I'll find more of these games that keep on piquing my interest. I hope you've enjoyed the series. I've spent more time writing these videos than I have working on any of the other reviews so far, and it's been really fun to make them. I want to thank everyone for watching them or reacting so positively to them. I'll have to think of another series to do. I'm thinking of doing genres next. Until next time. Once again, here's my Patreon if you want to support the channel so I can keep on making videos. I also have a Ko-Fi or Ko-Fi as well, if you feel like doing that. My job doesn't allow me to spend as much time on these and other projects as I'd like, and any help would be appreciated. There's a bunch of updates you can get for free on there, including what's coming up next and Halloween schedules for this year. If you do go on there, I should have a video explaining how I make videos, a review of Suite 776, and early access to Until Dawn and I'm Afraid of Monsters, which will be posted on Halloween this year. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I spent a lot of time writing these, I did not scream like a banshee or run away with the computer, even though I wanted to, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.